I think one of my favorite things when it comes to OCs and hearing about other OC creators is when they have a specific universe that all of their OCs stem from. And I think that comes a lot from my own history with most of my characters, because they all do stem from the same story. And it's been in development for maybe like 5 years. And over that course of time, it has changed a lot and developed on its own. It definitely started really rough. I think it was around middle school. That's when I started to really introduce some of the characters that are still present within the story now. And while not everything is the same anymore, there are some elements of it that ended up staying all the way until the end. I think it's really neat, and the entire universe itself has grown up with me in a way. That aside, I guess I kind of wanted to talk about some of the things I wish I did when I began building this universe, and some general tips. Quick disclaimer, this is not anything professional writing-wise. This is more or less just based on personal experience, and, you know, I'm a 17-year-old on the internet. What can you do? One of the things I really wish I did starting out the OC universe was building really solid foundations. And I don't necessarily mean like world building, though I think that is a very important aspect. And it's better to have a general idea of what it looks like than to just kind of go into it blind. And the more that you have, the better, I think. Especially when starting out, because sometimes it is difficult to piece things together when it's been in development for like years and you're kind of trying to figure out how to squeeze everything in a way that makes sense. Creating a solid foundation also means figuring out core components of the story. Because sometimes I was at a good point when it came to development, and as my tastes changed, so did some of the thematic elements, and it didn't mix. I ended up having to start from scratch. Technically, it had just gotten so messy at that point that none of it made sense. And while it is still a little bit messy now, there's definitely a lot more ground rules that I've made for myself in the way that things work that I didn't do maybe like the first 3 years that I was creating everything. While I did have to start from scratch somewhere around the middle at that point, I think it was for the better in fixing everything up and making it a little more balanced. So, solid foundations story-wise. Know what type of story, I guess, you're wanting to tell with your characters, and even if that's something very simple or very like lighthearted, it's better to know what you want out of this story than not. I think another really, really important part is picking a protagonist that you genuinely like. And I don't think you need to really have like one central character. Just having a good, likable cast, at least to you, can make the characters last a lot longer. At the beginning, because the foundations of it were all over the place, the protagonists also changed, I think, in every iteration until I settled on the character after the rewrite. And it's stayed static in that because of the slow development of that central character and then building a cast around them. I think it is really important creating a character that you can kind of resonate with at least a little bit, or one that you really do like, because I think the more you like that central character, the more passionate you can be when expanding the world around them. And I don't know, I think it makes for better story. The first few times I tried with different protagonists, it just didn't work because they were so disconnected from everything else. And I think that's in part because I wasn't 100% on them and I focused more on the other characters around them than the actual central character themselves. And again, you don't need one central character. It can really just be like an entire cast that you can jump from character to character with. It all just depends. What I'm trying to say here is make a cast of characters, I guess, that you really do like, because it does make that OC universe last longer passion-wise. This is another thing that I only really started to do maybe within the past 1 to 2 years, and that is really blending characters into the world around them. Again, going back to my first iterations of these guys, there is just so much disconnection from everything around them that it felt, I want to say, flat. When I began to go back and rewrite everything, I found it really important that I wanted to, first off, expand on some of the things that I maybe didn't before, including different areas, different cultures, and how those inspirations can be brought into the universe itself. But also the smaller things, like, are there any movements that could have inspired anything? Culturally, what things are different from others, depending on environment. And, for example, very recently I've been taking a lot of different cultural inspiration for all these different spaces, and I think diversifying the cast a little bit more that way, and then having characters slightly altered to fit those areas, it just makes it seem real and, I think, in some ways authentic. And I don't think it really needs to be anything crazy like that. It can be as simple as, what are the general societal norms, like fashion-wise, socially? While that is important, I think, with invigorating that into the design of the character, it's also really nice to know that stuff when you want to make a character the opposite of that. Like, let's say, for example, they want to go against things, because then you can make for a more impactful antithesis to all of these things. Another thing that I wish I focused on earlier was the thematic elements and what type of story I wanted to tell. Because again, in the first versions of this story, I felt like there was a bunch of different ideas that I was kind of throwing at the wall and hoping would stick. And because of that, it was just really messy and didn't flow well generally. Now I tried to stick with the important things that I think overlap a lot, or just things that tend to repeat themselves that are worth noting, and limiting myself a little bit, so that way I don't go completely off the rails when it comes to story elements. I think there's a lot of difference between writing a lighthearted sort of OC universe and one that is more heavy on history itself. My last thing is, don't be afraid to rewrite your universe. I've done this multiple times, retconned a bunch of things over time, because it just didn't, again, sit right with the rest of what I was writing at the time. And because of that, my characters have slowly evolved over time too, to the point we're at now, where it's starting to piece itself together a lot easier than when I began with just a very out there idea. And I don't think that means you have to scrap your characters altogether, because all of the characters that I developed 5 years ago are still very existent in the OC universe now. And while they might not have the same prevalence necessarily in some cases, I haven't let them go. I'm a sentimental person. But that doesn't mean you can't rewrite your universe if it's just too messy and it doesn't really feel coherent at all. Because I think my problem, again, going back to the first instances of this, And while that can work in some cases, that wasn't the story that I wanted to tell with all of my little guys. And really trying to make sense of it to justify their existence in the story just wasn't working out. Going back to foundations, you don't have to have it all planned out, because sometimes it will come to you as time goes on. Having the basics, like how do maybe the governments work, it's even more fun to write for all of the little gaps that you don't really have down yet. Of course, none of this is really coherent, and these are just some things that I really wish I started doing way back when I started to write this universe, because there's so many things that are scrapped, and like a good portion of what I wrote the first maybe like 2 to 3 years are just completely non-canon to the universe now, and I'm like, holy crap, yeah, most of this has not made it into the final cut. But regardless, it's been, I guess, a long journey with developing these little guys, and I'm sure that at some point there's going to be even more that I change, but it's definitely flowing a lot nicer now. And while that does, I think, attribute to because I'm a lot older now than I was in like middle school writing it for the first time, it's just, you know, these help me out a little bit, and I hope these help out even just a little bit too with getting started on making your own OC universe. And yeah, I'd like to hear if you have tips, whatever, when it comes to creating a central OC universe. And yeah, that's all. Bye.